Hello, so this is part 3. So before I actually show you canaries, I wanted to show you dark releases and what they can do for you. And so what I'm going to do is start this up. Let's see here, kubectl -f 6.dark releases, so they're mutually exclusive to canary deployments. This is another key component of the Istio course that he'll explain to you, which I think is really kind of a really cool process. And what dark releases allow you to do is they allow you to actually deploy changes in production using header-based routing. So one of the concepts that he will show you in the course is that of dark releases, which enforces header-based routing. But with dark releases, which is really nice, is you can actually test changes to some of your microservices in a production-based cluster. And instead of canary deployments, where canary will actually distribute a percentage of traffic to some of the other users based on either weights, or it could also do it based on other types of routing rules. With dark releases, the way to enforce that is you could have a QA team actually testing out your microservices in a production environment just to ensure that everything's going to run okay in production, because sometimes when things run just fine in staging, it doesn't mean that they always run just fine in production. I know I'm oversimplifying this. Not all cases are going to be good candidates for dark releases. Pretty much so, the good candidates for a dark release would be like UI changes or minor changes to services. So I've just got a very simple example that I incorporated into the application right here. So running regularly in production, when you bring up the application, you've got your brand dropdown and you got your type dropdown. Right now, your brand dropdown basically has Adidas, Puma, and Slazenger. And that is, consider that like our production, shall we say, brands. Just assume for a second that we just made a change to our catalog microservice and we actually wanted to do something new, or we wanted to add some new logic, if you will, to that. So what we have here is, I'm simulating that environment. I've got a catalog v2 right here. So I got this catalog regular version, and then I got this catalog v2 deployment, which isn't running right now because the first one is just showing these right here. So basically, when you start up this application, it's going to go out to the catalog service to get the brands, and it's going to populate the dropdown to that. Assuming we made a brand new change to the catalog service and called it v2, and it's going to return these brands with the dash new, just simulating a bunch of other logic, how would we test this in production without having actual production users be impacted? And so the one way to do that is actually through the concept of dark releases. And what I'll show you right here is a thing of header propagation. So there's a little plugin for Chrome here, but imagine various users, QA people have their own browsers, and one of the ways we can do these dark releases is through header injection, through this propagation. So right now, with each request, I've got this variable called x-myheader, which I've actually had to code into the microservice itself for distributed tracing. But here, it's set to canary 1. And so what I wanted you to see right here is we deployed these virtual services right here. Let me, before I actually show you a really cool tool called Kiali, I'm just going to kind of show you right here this dark releases is a part of Istio and what it does. But if you look here, there's a virtual service, and what it's going to do is it's going to do an incoming header match, and it's just basically going to say if there's a header out there called x-myheader and it matches exactly canary, then we actually want to send them to version 2 of the catalog service. And as you can see, we actually have two catalog services. We got version 1 right here, and then we got version 2. So what we're just saying is if you make a request and you have the header of this type, then you're going to go to version 2. Otherwise, you're going to go to version 1. Because this is set to Canary 1, we are not going to have an exact match. So we're always going to see version 1's data show up here. However, if I go ahead and change this, and I have a little plugin called Modify Headers, which allows you to hijack your headers and add, new values to headers. I'm going to go ahead and change this just to be Canary, and I'll go ahead and save it. So I just went ahead and saved it. Now I'll go ahead and refresh the site up here. Now notice we've got Adidas New right there. Really nice. So what just happened there? Basically, it found these rules and it just says, hey, I have a header within my request called xMyHeader, and it is set to the value of Canary, which we've set it inside of right there, as you can see this. And so it's going to redirect all of the requests for this particular service right now, and it's going to send it on over to version 2 of our catalog deployment. So now would be a good time to actually show one of the useful tools inside of Istio, which is called Kiali. And what I can do is I can actually go to port 3100, and Kiali, there's another thing that's attached to our service mesh, and what we can do is log in. Now if you notice, you're looking at this, you're like, what is all this good stuff here? Or just what is all this stuff? Notice here on the graph here, so you've got like a graphing. Let me just show you. Kiali is kind of like what your monitoring tool for Kubernetes is, only it does even more. So don't get me wrong, you can actually run your dashboard, your Kubernetes monitoring dashboard, and you can run Kiali at the same time. But Kiali right here, it gives you these different, shall we say, tools or menu options on the left here. So this will actually show you your applications running in your different various namespaces. It'll show you your workload. So if you look here, you can see that we've got basket data, cart, catalog, V2. It'll show you a graphical representation. Very nice, shows you your pods. But let me show you something really cool. If you go to your graph right here, notice what we're looking at. We are looking at our microservices application in graphical format. And what's really nice is you can actually see how this is all laid out. You have a legend right here. So if you look here at this legend, it'll basically tell you what each of these particular symbols mean. So this purple right here is a virtual service, which is another feature for Ingress controllers Ingress gateways within your Istio service mesh. You've got your different services running here. So if you look at your triangle, these are services. What you're looking at right here is you've got a virtual service right here called WebMVC, and it's actually load balanced to run between these two particular applications, which is really nice. We've got our catalog service, which has a virtual service behind the scenes. Let me go ahead and show traffic animation. So you can actually say, let's take a look at our traffic animation right here. So now if you look here, you can kind of see traffic flowing, how traffic actually flows in and out and things of that nature. So you can see we've got our cart service, which goes to our cart, shall we say, workload. And then our cart workload, you can see it's sending traffic over to our basket data. There's all kinds of different things you can do with Kiali. I'm not going to attempt to even show you or explain even really that much more, other than Kiali is another one of your benefits that you get with Istio. So seeing more visual representation, you can actually see now how we've got a situation where our web application, we have two pods there, is actually being load balanced by the Ingress gateway right here. So here's your virtual service, and it's showing you two different versions of that, as well as the two different versions of our cart, of our catalog. So here's our virtual catalog service right here, and as you can see, that it's communicating back and forth to two different versions of your catalog service. You can show your details. You can take a look. You can see that this particular virtual service is distributing its requests to these different pods right here, or services, I should say. And you can see, as I clicked on here, you can see how it's actually doing that through exact header routing, and it shows you your rules right there. Plus, you can look at your YAML, just like with the monitoring dashboard. You can go ahead and take this and tweak it, if you will, and apply it. And that's kind of what I did right here inside of here. Like for the dark releases, I just basically took some of the generated YAML and created these destination rules out of it and tweaked it ever so slightly. So anyways, I just kind of wanted you to see just a real quick demo on what Kiali is, and that comes as a freebie with the whole Istio service mesh. It's also kind of cool. I'm not really doing it justice, but you can actually show details, and then you could actually like delete your routing. You can you could do canaries, which I may do in another demo, but you could do canaries through this, or you can do it through configuration files. But you can monitor your traffic, and you can look at your metrics right here for your inbound traffic. Again, I won't go into details on each of these here because this is more of like just a demo rather than a tutorial. You can look at your logs, which is really nice for each of your workloads, and you can see what's going on behind there. So as you can see right now, this is all given to you by just applying Istio on your whole application. So you can start to see the power. This isn't provided by just regular Kubernetes. So the next application that we have available to us as well is, if we go to port 3001, we actually have Jaeger, which is distributed tracing. And distributed tracing is another powerful feature that you get with the Istio service mesh. And I'm really not going to go into great amounts of detail on what that is. But for the long and short of it is, you know, again, this comes with the whole service, Istio service mesh when you apply it. So you get Kiali, and then you have Jaeger UI. Now for distributed tracing, you can actually take a look at all of your requests. So in other words, when we brought up this catalog MVC application right here, one of the requests here, you can see that it actually comes in through the Istio gateway. And then behind the scenes, it's allocating its request or sending that request over to the MVC default through the cluster right here. And you can examine each of these tags right here just to kind of take a look at what happened with the traffic. But if you look right here, this little graph, it's kind of nice. You can see behind the scenes how we're reaching out to the catalog service from within the web MVC front-end application. So you can kind of get a tracing of what's going on throughout the system. So there's a whole big section on distributed tracing and how that works. You can filter out, you know, and how to set that up, but you can filter out your operations and find traces on that for the most part. As you can see, I'm looking for these various anywhere where we have actually reaching out to our catalog service, as you can see. And then you can drill in further and take a look at what happened, what the IP was. You could take a look at what your response size was, how long it took. So this actually would allow you to troubleshoot requests. If you're getting bottlenecks, you can actually use this Jaeger itself to take a look and try to identify where you may have some performance issues. As you can see, this whole request, just to bring it up, hitting the catalog cluster itself didn't really take that long. As you can see, it's going through these various operations. So the whole request from start to finish took like 412.09 milliseconds before we got our response back. And you can take a look at some of these other things to get kind of like more of a visual representation on what happened inside of here. So as you can see, we made a request through the Istio Ingress Gateway, and then it hit our MVC default application. And this is where it was reaching out to the catalog service just to get that drop-down list of items was 86.35 milliseconds. And then just to query the cart service, you can see how fast that was. So I just kind of wanted you to get a feel for Jaeger and what that does. There is one trick though, in order to get Jaeger and distributed tracing. Now there's a whole section on distributed tracing and with telemetry. If you notice here, we've got 5 spans. If you notice, it kind of bunches all these requests down in a hierarchical order. I wanted you to see one thing here though. If you take a look at this GUID X request ID, this value here, 5457430, ending right here, through the pipeline, through the chain, as it goes from the gateway down to here, this value is going to be the same. So this request ID, it's going to be the same as it makes each call down the chain. And then here's where it hits the catalog service. As you can see, this GUID X request ID value is still the same. One of the things that Richard makes quite clear in his course right here is the concept when you're doing telemetry and traffic-based distributed tracing and all that, propagate headers. Out of the box, Jaeger UI is not going to bundle these down within these spans here. Each request is going to be standalone. It's going to generate its own request ID. You actually have to propagate the headers yourself in the code, and unfortunately, that's one of the drawbacks of microservices, or at least distributed tracing at this particular time using Jaeger. Now, I went ahead and actually had to add header propagation within that .NET microservices application, such that as each request was being, shall we say, invoked by its parent request, I was having to take the header of this value X request ID, I was having to take that out of the parent and forward that on over to the next microservice. And the reason for that is it's known as your correlation ID. One of the key concepts in microservices and distributed tracing and logging is the concept of a transaction can actually span multiple microservices along the way, and you're going to need a way to actually tie that all together across all the microservices for logging. And you actually do that with correlation IDs. And so that's a key pattern in microservices. As a request goes from this service, well, in the incoming gateway, from this service down into your catalog service, and further down into the chain, if you need to be able to package and trace all of the, the whole life cycle of a request, could be a transaction, this correlation ID is really what ties the whole transaction together. And so out of the box, the correlation ID is not going to be the same as you make one call from one service to the next, to the next, to the next. Istio is going to generate a different value for the X request ID if it does not see it in the header. So that is kind of where we have to do our own housekeeping, at least at this time. There are some other libraries out there, like in Java, like he's using Java for his application. And he has a really nice library that'll do, it's kind of like an HTTP interceptor for those familiar with Angular and React. You can intercept all of your HTTP requests, and then you can just add, the value of header from your previous request to your next request. For .NET, I couldn't find anything really easy in such a way, so I went out and actually found a library and incorporated that into the microservices application for that Frank Oz course. And, you know, without giving away too much information, so here's some of the source code inside of there. So I actually imported this library. It's the header propagation library. Now, granted, I got to admit, this application here is still using .NET version 2. Now with .NET version 3, which I have not had a chance to port this over to version 3, there are better means and better libraries within .NET 3 to do the header propagation, but at the time that this was written, this is using .NET 2, so those particular libraries didn't exist. So I actually had to go out and find you know, a header propagation library out there on GitHub, and I had to bring it in and actually make some changes to it. The one that I found was a library called Istio header propagation, I believe. And here it is. It's a very nice library out there on GitHub. It's for .NET version 2. As you can see, you know, it is, you know, about 10 months ago or so, but I'd highly recommend bringing this into your application if you're using .NET version 2 and you haven't had a chance to upgrade your microservices over to version 3. You can actually bring this NuGet package in, and right out of the box, you'll actually have Istio header propagation such that you will have a correlation ID, which is this X request ID, and this is actually a well-known header ID for Istio. But what this particular library out there will do is it'll make sure that when you incorporate this into each of your microservices per se, it's going to go ahead and forward on all of the well-known Istio headers out there from one to the other, so that you can actually do this correlation ID tracing. It's a very important concept, and there are well-known patterns for it. But this is a great library. What I ended up having to do, though, is because for the dark release concept, I needed an additional header that I wanted propagated and passed through. This gentleman did this library perfectly. He encapsulated perfectly all of the Istio headers, and I was very, very pleased with it. I just went ahead and, because time was not on my side, I just imported his library in the source code itself into my application right here. And if you can see, that's what this header propagation is. So instead of a NuGet header or a NuGet package, I went ahead and just tweaked his library ever so slightly inside of here. Whereas you can see, I've got like, you know, this particular source is out of sync with the containers that I'm using. But as you can see, I made a change right there where we're propagating headers, we're passing these along here. So I did make a little bit of a change to the library itself, where it'll go ahead and forward these headers, new headers outside of the additional ones there, over from one microservice to the next. So I had to make some minor changes right here. What I ended up doing with custom headers is, you know, let's see right here. I just had to add a few dictionaries right here where you can pass your additional headers on by. So I just modified, you know, the interfaces there, including the fetcher middleware. Right here, I had to actually, you know, added logic for my additional headers right here to grab the new ones in order to get that dark releases stuff to work. But anyways, I'd recommend this library here, if you will. But having said that, that pretty much ends the demo right here on Jaeger as well. And now the next one would be Grafana. And I think with Grafana, I think that's port 3002, so, or 3102. So I'm going to bring up the application right there. There you go. And you get this out of the box too. So as you can see right now, if you install the Istio service mesh to your application, you get Kiali, which allows you to monitor and trace your application. You get Jaeger UI, which allows you to do trace your headers. It does distributed tracing across your microservices with a correlation ID. And again, if you're using .NET or other various things, you're going to have to add a little bit of code yourself into your microservices application to make sure you're passing along the X request ID over from one microservice to the next using the same value. So that way you can actually, shall we say, have your spans grouped together appropriately, which is what we've done here. And let me just go back here and look at the traces. You can see we've got 5 spans, 5 spans. So our requests are actually grouped together by spans, and these spans are tied together by that one correlation ID. And again, if I didn't add that logic to forward these identical values over from one service to the next, what you would end up with is, instead of having groups of requests inside of a span, you would see one span all the way across the board, and you'd really have no way of knowing that an incoming request here actually got forwarded down to here, which got forwarded to this particular cluster using the catalog service. So again, that's why the header propagation, I'm beating the dead horse to the ground, that's why that's so important. Going back to Grafana, Grafana is like another very useful monitoring tool, which will allow you to monitor performance and other particular metrics and telemetry within Kubernetes. And using the Istio service mesh, you get that right out of the box. So I'm just going to take a look. Actually, let me just go down here. If you see here, you can see you can get these different various dashboards you can look at. You can look at your Citadel, which is for your TLS communication across your services. You got your Galley, which is your YAML adaptation. So it'll take your Kubernetes YAML and convert it on over to what Envoy understands. You got your mesh, your mixer, you got your pilot, you got your service and your workloads. So all these different dashboards, you can go ahead and, let's see here, you can look at like all of your traffic coming into the application over a period of time. So this is almost kind of like CloudWatch, if you will, and where, in AWS and some of the other metrics monitoring services, where you can actually look at this to see what you can see all of your running applications inside of here. You can take a look at, legends. You can see your performance of each of these requests on a given time frame. I'm not going to attempt to actually explain what each one of these are, because a lot of these I'm not too familiar with them yet. But if you look here, you can see like your different thresholds. You can see your legends. So you can take a look at your snapshots in the last, in the last 30 minutes right here. You can look at for your last 3 hours. It's really kind of nice. So you can take a look at your CPU utilization. As you can see right here, between the hours of 10:30 and 12, you can actually see, where things spiked ever so slightly or ever so majorly. You can look at your memory, for each of these during a particular time frame. So in other words, what time of day were you running into certain memory issues right here, and you can actually see your counts as you highlight over them. So it's just really nice troubleshooting, and there are actually courses in Grafana alone. So that's why I'm not really going to attempt to go into this, but there's actual lectures and things on what you can do with Grafana. And so that's worth taking a look if you have time. But the key takeaway for this is Istio provides that for you with your service mesh if you go ahead and install it into your application. So one other thing I also wanted to show you is, in addition to all this goodness, I can also bring up the regular Minikube dashboard. I can also bring up the regular Kubernetes dashboard that you see here, which is opening up the individual proxy. And so this takes a little bit of time, but it's going to spin up the dashboard. Okay, so it spun up the dashboard in my Safari browser just by doing a Minikube start. If you're using Docker Desktop, I have instructions in one of my previous videos about where I demoed how to run this application within Kubernetes, where you can start up the dashboard manually by using the proxy and getting the token to log in. This this really nice with Minikube. It does all that stuff for you behind the scenes, so you don't have to copy and generate the token yourself. But as you can see here, we've got our individual jobs. So let me take a look at this right here. You can switch your namespaces. This is nothing new. This was demoed in the last application, or the last set of videos where I deployed the application over into Kubernetes cluster without Istio itself. But what I wanted you to see though right here is, in addition to being able to run, Kiali, which is just really good, you can still run, the Kubernetes dashboard to see all of your running pods, if you will, as well as your, services. You can take a look at your replica sets still. One other interesting thing inside of here that I wanted to mention. So we'll take a look at your services running here. Now you can see we've got our Istio system. I can switch over to my namespace there. And if you take a look here, this is kind of interesting. You can see all the different services, shall we say, within the Istio namespace that have been started up. So here's that sidecar injector for Istio, where it attaches the Istio sidecar container with each of your containers within your running pods. And the way that happened, again, refreshing your memory, is you had to label your namespace when you started up Istio to say, hey, Istio, this is the namespace that you want to go ahead and look at the existing pods and containers inside of there to inject yourself into. So that's what the sidecar injector is doing. And again, you've got your Citadel, which is your TLS communication, where it, it does certificates and TLS communication within Istio. So to make sure that all of your traffic, because nodes could expand out of the network, and you don't want to run the risk of that traffic being unencrypted. There's Jaeger. So here's our collector, which is going to, basically collect all of your telemetry data for Jaeger, which you're seeing right here for your distributed tracing. And let's see what else we've got here. The telemetry, if you look here, this is kind of nice. You've got your chart tracing. You've got, you've got your policies. You've got, your pilot, which is another one of your main Istio components. But I'm hoping this makes a little bit more sense by looking at this, just to see what's out there and what you can do with Istio at this time. Again, some of the other really nice features, so if you look at your replica sets, there's your Grafana replica set that's running up there too. So trying to think if there's some other things. I'd like to kind of demo in the next video or in another video how canaries work, but I'm hoping that I was able to demo dark releases here just by using the header propagation, by toggling this, from canary 1 to canary. It would turn around and invoke the header-based routing for the dark releases, which would allow you to, let me go back here, and I know I'm just kind of duplicating myself a little bit here, but I'm just making this up off the top of my head. So just by setting that header up to canary, it's guaranteeing that anytime we go out to the catalog service, aka to get that drop down of brands, we're going to go to version 2 instead of version 1. And version 2, basically is going to show you -new at the end here. So this is still hitting version 1, and again, that's because inside of here, I'm still showing, canary 1 right here. So if I change that to plain old canary and refresh the page, now all of a sudden you'll notice that we've got new in there. So that's kind of how the header-based propagation works too. And again, going to your Kiali console, there's other things I'd highly recommend, playing around with it and taking a look at what you can do inside of there. This graphs one is just like one of the best. It just makes the whole thing worthwhile. You can see I've got some load balancing going on here with my MVC front end service right here, with my virtual services and destination rules going on here. So anyhow, let me stop this video, and my next video I'll probably do a quick test on canary deployments where, you know, you can allocate a certain percentage of your traffic to go from one over to the other. And if I click on that, as you can see right here, you know, that magic is done right in here with version 1 and version 2. I can just go ahead and change my weights to say 80% of the time I want to go to version 1, or 20% of the time I want to go to version 2. So I'm going to stop this recording and you know, continue on after that. So again, thanks for watching, and I hope this is a little bit helpful. Thanks again. Bye-bye.